Hi, my name is Catherine Allen and this is InterpreTIPS, where we answer your questions about the interpreting profession. Today's InterpreTIP is the second part of a two-part answer to a question sent in by a listener who found herself in a very difficult situation during a deposition. At the deposition, a lawyer who had just a little bit of Spanish chose to interpret some of the questions directly to his client rather than using the services of the interpreter right next to him. And the question was, what can you do in that situation? Well, for interpreters in legal settings, there's not a whole lot you can do because the code of ethics is very strict and attorney-client privilege prevents much interference. Today's InterpreTIP focuses on what we can do in healthcare and other community interpreting settings when something similar happens. If a provider or a service provider is speaking the non-English language and they really aren't proficient with it and they're jeopardizing service. The good news is in healthcare and community settings, we have a lot more leeway as interpreters as to how we can intervene. Our code of ethics and standards of practice allow us some intervention techniques to put communication back on track if we see it going in the wrong direction. And it's important to remember why that's true. That's true because our fundamental purpose when interpreting in a community or healthcare setting is to help facilitate access to a service. So we are allowed to intervene if we feel like communication is starting to deny access or compromise the quality of access to that service. So what can a healthcare or interpreter in other community settings do if the provider is using a non-English language in a not very good way to directly provide service, as this attorney did with his client? Well, one strategy we have is to use our professional introduction to emphasize that we are there to interpret everything that is said. We have to maintain transparency and accuracy. So if the provider continues to go on and start communicating direct, critical, nuanced information in a language he's not proficient in, then we can intervene and suggest that perhaps what is being interpreted is not fully clear or something along those lines. And the provider may take the cue and realize they need to switch from trying to provide service directly in a language they're not proficient in and use the interpreter services who is there for that purpose. So that's one strategy. Now, not all providers are going to necessarily smile upon that, or they may refuse to take the hint. And in that case, you can stay in the session, do the best you can do, but afterwards find the appropriate supervisor and report what is happening. And try to encourage education for the provider that the interpreter services really need to be used when communicating complex, nuanced information. And a final strategy can be used in agencies and hospitals that have very good language access plans and good policies where they've thought through the situation and they've trained both interpreting staff and providers to understand when it's okay to communicate directly in the client's or patient's language and when you need to be using the services of an interpreter. So for example, it's a wonderful thing for a doctor to greet a patient in Chinese and develop rapport and develop a direct relationship. But then they know to stop and use the services of the interpreter who's there. And so hospitals that have this kind of policy will typically have an interpreter present in the room no matter what, and the interpreter is empowered to intervene and point out that the provider needs to use their service. But again, that's not very common, but there are some places that are establishing that kind of best practice model. So those are three strategies that we think you can use. Let us know if you think of any others that you want to share. And that's it for now. Thank you.